Turn around. Hands behind your back. Those were the first words a decorated U.S. Army general heard as two local cops slammed her onto the hood of her own car in front of her new suburban home. No warning, no questions, just a racist assumption wrapped in a uniform. One neighbor whispered, "She doesn't look like she belongs here." Another dialed 911. What happened next would shake the neighborhood and the entire department to its core. As Frederick Douglass once said, "The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." And on this quiet street, oppression finally met its limit. This isn't just another story about abuse of power. It's about what happens when the wrong person is targeted and the right kind of justice answers back. If this story sparks something in you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button, because stories like this deserve to be heard, loud and clear. Under the soft glow of a suburban street lamp, the quiet of the evening was pierced by the heavy rumble of a black Lexus gliding into the driveway of a freshly painted home. The engine cut, and a tall black woman in her late 40s stepped out. She wore a fitted blazer over a navy blue blouse, tailored slacks and polished black pumps. Her posture was impossibly straight, her movement composed and deliberate. In one hand she held a house key, in the other a Pentagon-issued ID badge, partially tucked in her purse. Across the street, behind a manicured hedge, a curtain twitched. Janet Monroe narrowed her eyes from her living room window. She clutched her wine glass, already on her second pour, and muttered under her breath, "That's not the family who toured that house last week." Her teenage son, Matthew, glanced up from his phone. "Mom, seriously?" Janet ignored him. She reached for her phone and, without hesitation, dialed 911. "Yes, hello? I'd like to report a suspicious person entering the house across the street." "No, I don't recognize her. She's driving a black Lexus, and I think she might be trying to break in." The dispatcher on the other end asked a few questions. Janet answered with increasingly exaggerated concern. "She's just standing there, staring at the door. Who knows what she's planning?" Within minutes, the red and blue flash of a patrol car lit up the cul-de-sac. Officer Rick Daniels, a stocky white cop in his late 40s, stepped out. His younger partner, Officer Mike Salazar, followed closely behind. "Here we go," Rick muttered. "Let's see what this is all about." The woman was now unlocking her door, humming quietly to herself. As she stepped inside, the officers approached quickly. "Ma'am," Rick barked. "Step back outside. Now." She turned around slowly, brows raised. "Excuse me." "We received a call about suspicious activity," Salazar added, a little less aggressively. The woman stepped back onto the porch, confused but calm. "I live here. Is there a problem?" Rick looked her up and down, scoffing. "This your house?" "Yes." "You have ID to prove that." "I do." She reached for her purse. Rick stepped forward, nice and slow. She nodded and pulled out her ID. Instead of a driver's license, she handed him a sleek government card with her name, photo, and department emblem embossed in silver. Rick glanced at it briefly and frowned. "Naomi Carter, Department of Defense?" "That's correct." "Ma'am, that's not what I asked. Do you have proof of ownership for the house?" Naomi's expression hardened just slightly. "I just closed this morning. The deed is in the box. I haven't unpacked yet. You'll have to take my word for it. For now." Rick chuckled, a sound more mocking than amused. "Yeah, we've heard that before." Salazar looked uncertain. "Rick, maybe we should slow down." But Rick was already moving. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "What?" Naomi blinked. "You're arresting me?" "You're resisting. Don't make this harder than it has to be." She didn't move. Rick grabbed her wrist and yanked it behind her. Naomi didn't resist, but her stance didn't break either. The other arm followed. Cold metal kissed her skin. Click, click. The cuffs locked in place. The neighborhood watched. Matthew stood on the porch beside his mother, who was filming the entire scene with her phone. A self-satisfied smirk plastered across her face. "This is unbelievable," Naomi muttered, her voice level but sharp. "You have no idea who I am, but you will." Sure we will, Rick said. In booking. Naomi inhaled deeply, then turned her head toward a boy standing on a nearby sidewalk, recording the entire event with his phone. You, she said, dial this number. Speak clearly, and hand me the phone once they answer. The boy looked startled, but nodded. She recited the number from memory, slowly, with precision. Salazar shifted uneasily. Rick, you might want to hold up a sec. But Rick wasn't listening. She's bluffing. The phone rang once, twice. Pentagon secure line, said the voice on the other end. Naomi didn't hesitate. This is Lieutenant General Naomi Carter. Badge numbers 8271 and 1045 have just detained me, without cause. I am currently in handcuffs outside my residence at 48 Mayfield Lane, Arlington, requesting immediate verification of authority and action. The line went quiet. Then came the crackle of a redirected feed. A low voice boomed through the officers' radios, simultaneously. All units, stand down. Code red. Repeat, stand down.
Rick blinked. What the?
The dispatcher's voice followed seconds later, confirming identity. General Naomi Carter, Pentagon level clearance. Officers on scene, await direct command. Salazar stepped back, hand instinctively brushing against his sidearm. Rick's hands dropped from his belt. Naomi turned to face them, the cuffs still on. Now that you're listening, I suggest you remove these. Salazar immediately reached for his key, fumbling to unlock the cuffs. Naomi rubbed her wrists gently, then stepped away. You assaulted a Pentagon official in her own home, she said, her voice low and controlled. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Rick's mouth opened, but no words came out. Naomi pulled out her phone and made a second call. Yes, Secretary. I'd like to initiate a full audit on Officers Rick Daniels and Mike Salazar of Arlington PD. I want their body cams pulled, all complaints reviewed, and I want it done before sunrise. A black SUV pulled up seconds later. A man in a military uniform stepped out and saluted Naomi. Ma'am, we've been informed. Good. Escort these men to internal affairs. I'll follow. Janet's wine glass dropped and shattered on her porch. Matthew stared at Naomi like she was a Marvel character, come to life. Naomi met his gaze and offered a small, knowing nod. Later that night, news broke across the region. 2 officers under federal investigation after detaining high-ranking Pentagon official without cause. The footage was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, CNN. Janet tried to spin her video as concern for the neighborhood, but it backfired spectacularly. She was bombarded with backlash online. Her HOA held a special meeting, and local parents demanded her removal from the PTA. As for Rick and Salazar, they were placed on unpaid leave pending a federal investigation. Salazar issued a public apology. Rick lawyered up. Neither wore a badge again. Naomi didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. The next morning, she was already back at work, briefing intelligence on a threat overseas, but her presence in the neighborhood remained. A quiet reminder to everyone on that street. Power doesn't always wear a uniform, and justice doesn't knock. Sometimes, it lets itself in. For several seconds, the only sound was the static hum of the officers' radios and the distant barking of a dog somewhere down the street. The atmosphere had changed, not slowly, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch from confidence to dread. Rick Daniels was frozen. His face had turned ghostly pale, the sweat now visible at his temples, beating down the sides of his jaw. His hand instinctively reached toward his badge, as if trying to reassure us that it still meant something. It didn't. Lieutenant General Naomi Carter, still standing tall in her iron slacks and navy blouse, brushed the wrinkles out of her sleeves and looked him square in the eye. You just handcuffed a decorated Pentagon officer in front of civilian witnesses without probable cause. Salazar backed up a step, his breathing shallow. General, we were responding to a call. And in responding, Naomi said, voice precise and even, you violated protocol, used unnecessary force, and failed to confirm identity. That's not just a bad look. That's grounds for federal indictment. She turned her head slightly as another vehicle pulled up to the curb, a black unmarked Suburban. From it stepped a tall man in a tailored dark suit. He wore no badge, no name tag, but his presence radiated authority. He approached with calm, confident strides, stopping beside Naomi and offering her a small nod. "Ma'am," he said simply, "I'm here per the secretary's direct order." Naomi gestured toward the two officers. "Take them into custody. Hold them for internal interrogation. Full compliance expected." Rick found his voice at last. "Wait, this is insane. You can't just—" The man in the suit cut him off without raising his voice. "You assaulted a federally protected officer during a non-hostile situation. You'll remain silent until legal counsel is provided." Rick's jaw clenched. His hands trembled, but he didn't resist when the man reached for his wrist and methodically secured a zip tie. Salazar didn't even make a sound as he turned and placed his hands behind his back voluntarily. Neighbors began stepping out of their houses. Porch lights blinked on. A few phones were raised, red recording lights already flashing. Janet Monroe stood at her doorway, arms wrapped tightly around her body. Matthew hovered behind her, his eyes wide, a sick twist of regret churning in his stomach. Janet stepped forward. "General Carter, I didn't know. I thought you were— the neighborhood's been quiet and—" Naomi didn't let her finish. "You thought I didn't belong, that my car, my skin, and my silence were threats. You didn't call 911 because of a crime. You called because of your fear." I didn't mean for this to happen," Janet stammered. "I was just worried about safety." Naomi's eyes sharpened. "Yours or mine?" Janet had no answer. Her voice failed her. Naomi continued, her voice lower but colder. "I've commanded soldiers in battle. I've sat across from heads of state, and I've come home to find that the war still waits at my doorstep, just in different uniforms." She turned away from Janet and stepped toward the boy who had helped her, Jamal, a high school sophomore whose hands were still shaking slightly from holding the phone. He looked up at her like he was seeing a superhero in real life. "You did the right thing," Naomi told him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for listening when no one else did." "I knew something was off," Jamal said, voice cracking slightly. "They didn't even ask questions, just grabbed you." "Sometimes that's all it takes," she replied. "One witness, one voice." A few minutes later, a second set of SUVs arrived, this time from the Pentagon's Office of Inspector General. Naomi greeted the agents by name. They moved with robotic efficiency, interviewing neighbors, collecting phones, securing body cam footage from the officers, and establishing an official scene perimeter. As Rick and Salazar were escorted into the back of a federal vehicle, one reporter had already arrived, a local NBC affiliate, whose van came skidding to a halt 2 houses down. A cameraman jumped out, capturing a wide shot of the entire neighborhood. The anchorwoman held her mic with trembling excitement. "We're live in Arlington, Virginia, where what appears to be a case of mistaken identity and police misconduct has spiraled into a federal investigation involving a high-ranking Pentagon official." Naomi said nothing to the press. She simply handed them a business card and walked back up her steps with full composure. Inside her new home, still lined with half-open boxes and untouched furniture, Naomi sat on the edge of a leather couch and finally allowed herself a deep breath. She reached into her bag, pulled out a simple silver frame, and placed it gently on the mantel. It held a photo of her and her father, a retired general shaking hands with a U.S. president decades earlier. Moments later, her phone buzzed. It was the Secretary of Defense. "Naomi," the voice said, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said. "But we need to talk about deeper training across local law enforcement. This isn't a one-time thing. This is systemic." "I'll schedule it," the secretary replied. "Tomorrow morning. Make it tonight." She hung up, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, the police lights had faded, and the street was quiet again, this time for the right reasons. Across the way, Matthew sat on his porch steps, staring down at his shoes. When Naomi stepped out again to check her mailbox, he stood. "General Carter?" he called softly. She turned. "I'm sorry," he said. She nodded. Learn from it. Make sure you're not the next one to call the wrong shot. I will. Naomi walked back inside and closed the door. The deadbolt clicked firmly into place. Behind that door lived not just a general, but a warning, a reckoning, a reminder that injustice, no matter how subtle or polite, would be met not with anger, but with action. And some uniforms, no matter how intimidating, would never outrank truth. The next morning, sunlight crept across the rooftops of Mayfield Lane, casting soft golden beams over trimmed hedges and quiet porches. The neighborhood looked the same as it always did, orderly, pristine, and peaceful. But something in the air had shifted. People stepped outside with coffee mugs in hand, glancing toward the house at number 48, the one with the black Lexus in the driveway, and the woman who had shaken the very foundation of their assumptions. Inside, General Naomi Carter was already dressed in uniform. Not the navy blouse and slacks from the night before, but her full military attire, decorated with ribbons, medals, and the 4 silver stars on her shoulder, that made it clear she was one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Armed Forces. She stood at the mirror, pinning her final bar into place. Then checked the time, 6:47 a.m. On schedule. She grabbed her briefcase and stepped into the foyer, where a copy of the Washington Post lay folded on the floor. The headline was, Pentagon General Unlawfully Detained in Virginia Suburb, Officers Under Federal Investigation. Beneath it was a photo of her, mid-sentence, surrounded by federal agents. Next to that, the blurry freeze frame of Rick Daniels in handcuffs, eyes wide with disbelief. Naomi tucked the paper under her arm and stepped outside. As she walked down her front steps, she noticed Jamal waiting by the sidewalk. He was holding a brown envelope and looked nervous, but determined. Ma'am, he said, holding it out. This is the footage I recorded. I uploaded it too, but I figured you'd want a copy. She took it gently. Thank you, Jamal. You did more than most adults would have. I just thought it wasn't right, he said. The way they treated you, it didn't sit right with me. Naomi smiled, softening for a moment. That's how change starts, with one person who refuses to stay silent. A car pulled up, black and government issued. The driver stepped out and opened the door for her. As Naomi climbed in, she turned back to Jamal. You ever consider public service? He shrugged. Maybe. Think about it. We need more people like you in the room. The car door closed, and within seconds, she was gone, headed to a meeting with the Secretary of Defense to discuss not just what had happened, but what would come next: policy, reform, mandatory cultural training, rapist departments. A national conversation sparked by one incident in one quiet suburb. Later that week, both officers were formally charged. Officer Rick Daniels faced multiple counts: unlawful detainment, abuse of authority, and civil rights violations. Officer Salazar, though less aggressive, was suspended indefinitely for failing to intervene. The Arlington Police Department released a public apology, and the chief of police personally requested a meeting with General Carter to review department procedures. Janet Monroe resigned from her position on the HOA board amid mounting pressure. Though she tried to frame the incident as a misunderstanding, public backlash made it clear people were tired of apologies that came only after exposure. As for Naomi, she never commented publicly on the event. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own statement. She continued her duties at the Pentagon with the same diligence and grace she always had. But her presence in the neighborhood was no longer quiet or questioned. Neighbors waved now. They smiled, some out of guilt, some out of awe, but most out of something deeper: respect. At the end of the week, a new plaque appeared outside her front door. Not flashy, not engraved in gold, just a small bronze plate that read, Loading, Gen. Naomi Carter, United States Army. A reminder, not of what happened, but of who lived there, and who was watching. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, and this story proves how true that still is. General Carter's experience reminds us that racism doesn't always wear a hood or scream across a crowd. Sometimes it shows up in a uniform with a badge and a quiet assumption about who belongs and who doesn't. But power built on prejudice is no match for truth backed by courage. Let this be a lesson. Never judge someone's worth by how they look, or you might end up mistaking a 4-star general for a criminal. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit like, and if you believe more people should hear stories that speak truth to power, subscribe to join this journey. Your voice, your engagement, that's what keeps these stories alive.